Hello and welcome to the Collecting Heroes podcast. I'm your host JD, the collector of collectors, and this is the place where I interview pop culture collectors from around the world. And tonight, I'm actually going a little bit south. And when I say south, I mean maybe to hell and back with my next guest. His name is Ty. He's from Colorado, and he is a Spawn collector. How you doing, Ty?
I'm doing well, JD. Thank you.
Matt, I am so excited to talk to you, and I say that a lot. Everyone knows I say that. But this is another character who has a little bit of a nostalgia for me as well. Part of the podcast is me talking and geeking out with people and, sharing in nostalgia. But this is something from my teen years that I remember. And when I first learned about Spawn was through the movie, but also in my earlier days going into comic book stores and seeing the posters on the wall for Spawn. There's this massive larger than life character, I should say. Sorry, massive larger than life character who I was just fascinated with, and my best friend was also fascinated with, and buying all the figures. But for you, we were talking beforehand. You said you're a bit of an OG collector, so tell me a bit about the history of where you got to discover Spawn and how you became a fan.
Sure, JD. Thank you. Definitely, it's the roots are definitely within the geekiness of it, absolutely, and how after so many years, I still go out there and buy the comics and buy the toys and buy the collectibles. So, where to start? It starts in 1992 when Image Comics was basically breaking through the mainstream. Right, you had DC and Marvel, and Image Comics was this independent comic books publisher that was releasing books, and I was introduced to comic books in a very organic way, just by walking home from school and having a buddy that always went with me, and he's like, "Hey, have you been to a comic book store before?" And I said, "I haven't. What is that?" And the rest is history. He introduced me to the world of collecting comic books, and being that it's 1992, Image Comics was the talk of the town, the comic book
Uh-huh.
stores, and everybody
Yeah.
was just talking Image Comics. And talking about Image Comics and in buying the books, and then knowing about Todd McFarlane with Spider-Man, and then it was just full hype. I mean, you talk about like how we have today's a movie coming out like The Flash, and everybody's very hyped up for the movie. Back then, no internet. Back then, no web pages, no nothing,
Uh-huh.
and the hype it's felt in the comic book stores because the comic book store owners are telling you, "Hey, keep an eye on this book. Hey, this book's coming out next week." And Spawn was that book. And when that book hit the stands and I grabbed a copy, I bought one copy. I was in high school, and the art was just unbelievable. To me, I was just hooked with the story. And I had to wait a whole 30 days for issue number 2. So you can imagine like how many times I reread issue number 1, studying every panel and how the lettering worked, how the colors worked, even the smell of the paper. Everything was just so brand new to me, and I was
Yeah.
just a fan from issue 1. And here we are, all these many years later, 300 plus issues later, and we're still collecting Spawn here.
And Todd McFarlane, he has such a distinct art style as well. But for people who may not be as familiar with Spawn, because while obviously something like I collect Batman, everyone pretty much identifies with Batman. Spawn is one of those characters that I think, unless you're sort of into the comic culture, you might not be as familiar with the character. So explain it as though you were just with someone, like I said earlier. If we were at a bar and I had someone here who had no idea who Spawn was, or
Sure.
who Spawn was, give us a quick explanation, because I also used the phrase "to hell and back" before because I'm familiar with the character. But give a quick rundown of who Spawn is and how Spawn came to be.
Well, I think if I was, I mean, if we were at a bar and we're talking, and there's somebody that doesn't know who Spawn is and who is Spawn and what is Spawn, I think right off the bat I would say he is a dark anti-hero. So
Uh huh.
I would start with that, right? So he's a dark anti-hero in the lines of The Crow, right? The comic book and the movie, in the lines
Mm-hmm.
of Darkman and The Shadow, kind of very much on the darker side of things, and not on the bright side as you have your friendly Spider-Man or Robin and Superman.
Hmm.
So I would
Hmm.
start off saying like he's a dark anti-hero who sold his soul to the devil in reason to come back to see his wife, to be with his wife.
Yeah.
His love for his wife was so intense, and he was so connected to her that he made that bargain with the devil. And the devil, knowing that he was getting somebody who was a killer, because before Al Simmons passed away, he was a black ops, as a special unit assassin. So
Hmm.
he knew that by collecting that soul, he was not getting just any regular Joe. He was getting a killer, a badass killer, and
Hmm.
he made that deal. But as we know, dealing with the devil, you got to read the fine print, and
Yep.
he got a bad deal on it. So Spawn is the journey, is the it's the exploration of him accepting that he got a bad deal, and making it through, knowing all these powers that he was given by the devil, but trying to use them for a good reason.
Yeah, I love it, and it's a really cool story. I mean that deal with the devil has been done many times over, but this was obviously a really great way to see it in a comic book fashion. And as I said, Todd McFarlane has such a great writing style as well. Speaking of Todd McFarlane, because we do have McFarlane toys who have done massive things over the years as well. What was the first toys that you got? Because you have quite the extensive toy collection as well. What were the first figures you got? You obviously got that first comic back in '92. Was it around the same time that you started collecting those other items, or did it just start with comics?
It started with comics in 1992, and then we didn't really see collectibles until 1994, when the first action figure based on Spawn came out. And
Hmm.
when 1994 hit, so between 1992 and 1994, you could say there was the buildup of the hype through the magazines, that Todd McFarlane announced, "Hey, I'm going to make action figures at some point. There
Yeah,
will be figures, right?"
yeah,
So the local magazine that you get, which is probably already 30 days older by the time that it gets published. So you're reading about it, and there's comments. Todd McFarlane planning on releasing Spawn figures, and I'm like, as a fan, I'm like, whoa, that sounds exciting. Are they going to be Star Wars size? Are they going to be or bigger? Because back then the Star Wars action figure, the 3 inch and 3/4 size, was pretty much the standard, well-known size for collectibles. You
yep,
had the vehicles and everything else that was on that side. You got G.I. Joe also
yep.
on that size. So, you know, as you don't know what's going to happen, I thought, oh, it's going to be probably like Star Wars size, or it's going to be, larger. And so 1994 hits, and we had all these pictures of the figures. So I was at in the morning at a store here called Kmart, and that's no longer in business. And I went there when they opened at 8 a.m. I went inside the store, went to the toy aisle, and I saw Series One of the Spawn action figures on an end cap. Mind you, I think I'm about hitting college year now. I couldn't afford to buy all of them at the same time, so I picked Spawn and I picked Medieval Spawn. Those were my first two figures, and I remember buying two of the Spawn figures, one to open and one to keep in the box.
Hmm.
And I mean, if you look at the Spawn Series One figure, it is a larger size. It is almost about a 6 inch tall figure, and it was it changed the toy game for many companies. They looked at this figure and they saw the level of detail, the paint, they saw the even the accessories, and the packaging with the comic book. It was just a game changer for other companies, and it inspired Marvel Legends. I'll go as far as saying that that size inspired Marvel Legends to make larger
Mm.
size figures, right? And even as of today, Todd McFarlane sticks to that same scale.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, McFarlane toys huge now, right? So many places you can get McFarlane toys, and I remember for me seeing those figures was in the late '90s, so around that '97 when the movie came out. Was when my friend became obsessed with them, and he had the disposable income, when we were teenagers that I didn't have at the time. And he was going out, he was obsessed and just picking up every figure he could, like, because he just became obsessed with them. So he had all the figures that were released. And I remember at the time they were a more expensive figure too than a lot of other, because obviously you had your toys that might have been $10 off the rack, whereas these were premium scale collectible toys and figures, and they were costing anywhere up to sometimes $50 for some of them. I've actually still got one of them, which unfortunately I don't have here to show you, but is in storage, and I don't even know the name technically of it, but it's essentially like a diorama that comes in a plastic case, and it's a Spawn figure, and then it has a heap of bats as well. They're like within the case.
Yes,
And
so you have the bigger size, you said, or the larger size one?
yeah, so this would be a good 10 to 12 inches tall, I think.
Oh yes, I am very
Yeah,
familiar with that one. It's Spawn issue 43, also known as the Flying Spawn, and it's a really nice figure.
and because I love bats, obviously love Batman as well. When he decided to move on from his Spawn collection, he gifted me that one and told me I could keep it.
This is the smaller scale of that figure. It's the Flying Spawn. You can see the bats.
Yeah,
So
that's
you put it
cool.
together, and it's pretty impressive. The cape is just ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
and for
yeah,
people who are not familiar with the cape, the Spawn cape, it's massive. It's almost like a second entity, right? It's a part of him as well.
correct, correct. In the likes of Venom, in the likes of the symbiote themes, you could say that the cape and the costume, it is type as a symbiote to Spawn. So it has even the chains. They all have a connection to the nervous systems of the Spawn character. So
Hmm.
the cape is an extension of him. The chains, the spikes, everything reacts to depending on what the situation is. So the costume, you could say, it evolves depending on what he's confronting at the time.
Yeah, and let's actually talk about the movie as well, because this is one of the things I was thinking about last night when I was doing a bit of more research into it, and when I was remembering back the timeline. Obviously, seeing that the first comic was released in 1992, and then that movie did come out in the cinemas in 1997, which was a pretty big hit at the time as well, as far as comic book movies. I have to admit, it's probably not the greatest rated comic book movie of all time. I'm sure for a fan like yourself, you still love to go back and watch it. I have. I've gone back and watched it multiple times. Um, but it was still this massive character that came out, and having a comic book released in 92 and then it on the screen by 97, I think that must be almost unheard of, to have a character that's released and then hits, a major motion picture in that time. Could you think of any other character that's happened to?
Well, no, because it was so fast. You nailed it. It was so fast because 1992 the comic hits, 1994 the action figures, which was pretty fast 2 years after, and then 1997 you got a movie, you got a major motion picture movie coming out. It's not
Yeah,
even something that is independent or something that is low budget. No,
correct.
this was definitely a competing high visual effects budget movie by New Line Cinema. So
Uh-huh.
they were putting all their bets on this movie and to do well, and it did, considering the fact that it was competing against Air Force One with Harrison Ford on that weekend. The Spawn movie debuted at number two on that weekend, which is pretty good for a character that doesn't have that background history like Batman and Spider-Man or
Hmm.
anybody else.
Yep.
And Todd McFarlane does a movie and does it right. It may not be the greatest Oscar performance ever, or the visual effects in some from what I've heard they run out of money for the visual effects budget,
Yeah.
but for everything else, they didn't mess it up. It's not an unwatchable movie. It is, you catch it on the local cable TV sometimes, and you can still enjoy the movie for what it is. And there's some
Uh-huh.
bits and parts that you can see the costume in action, that you can see, that action sequence and the chains and the performance by John Leguizamo. He
Mm.
nails the role of the Violator and the clown. I mean,
Yep.
like, that helps too. So all things considered, for a character that didn't have that background like the mainstream characters do, I think it did, in my opinion, really well considering all of those facts.
And he was a fairly popular actor at that time too. During those late '90s period, he was doing quite a number of different movies. He'd featured in Romeo and Juliet. Trying to think what else. I think
The
it,
Pest
yeah, he did
and
quite a
Super
number of
Mario Brothers.
yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
we
he was
don't talk about that one.
he was Luigi.
Yeah, but he was sort of like this it boy like at the time that was popping up in a lot of movies. So I know when they had him attached to it, it was like, oh, well, this could be really good. And
Yeah,
yeah, as I said, I've still gone back and watched it multiple times. I think the last time I watched it was only about a year and a half ago. Actually, I think I was talking to my girlfriend about it. I'm like, have you ever watched this movie? And she's
oh,
like, no. I'm like, you got to watch it. I said, prepare yourself. Like, it's definitely very '90s and like like doesn't hold up against some of the comic book movies we watch now, but I still
that's
enjoy it. And
exactly how I
yeah,
introduced it myself. I said, okay, just be warned. That's how I started, right? Like, it's from the '90s, so
yeah. And I'm quite surprised that I know that they've done animated versions right since. I'm fairly certain.
they did an award-winning HBO animation, and that show, and it came out in 1997 as well. 1997 was considered the year of Spawn. There was so
Mhm.
much going on that year. You had the movie, you had the animated series, you had the soundtrack, which still holds up of today. You
Yeah, I
had
was
the
going to talk about it
video
too.
game,
Yeah.
yeah, and you had the video game, the PlayStation 1 video game. So it was the year of Spawn in many ways. So 1997 was big for Todd McFarlane, and the HBO animated show was definitely one of those big shows. And HBO won an Emmy for that TV show.
Nice. I'll have to actually go back and see if I can watch it at some point. When you talk about that album, was definitely one of the hooks, I think, for that movie
Oh,
and its success because that
yeah.
soundtrack had the mashups between at the time. Obviously, there was this big new metal focus that was happening. A lot of rock bands that were top of the charts, and they merged them with a lot of famous DJs. And the one that comes to mind for me and always sticks out and is still in playlists for me to this day is the Trip Like I Do, the uh,
Filter.
Filter and the Crystal Method, I
Yeah.
believe. Yeah, and for me as a musician, those days playing in rock bands and stuff, I loved the album, and it was definitely on rotation. Do
Oh,
you still
that's
listen
still
to some of those songs?
it still holds up, and I do listen. So as you, I know, but I have the Spawn room, and I come into the Spawn room, and I have an Alexa in the Spawn room, and I just tell Alexa, play Spawn movie soundtrack, and she just the first song that she'll play is "Can't Trip Like I Do" by Filter and the Crystal Method.
Yes.
So that soundtrack, like you said, JD, it holds up. I think it still holds up, and people identified those songs, especially that one, with Spawn and the movie. So it it's like I said, it still holds up. And there was a vinyl release, there was a CD release, there was a Sony mini disc release, and there was a cassette tape. So it was pretty big hit. In fact, they sold, like, how they have those platinum records, gold records
Uh-huh.
for
Uh-huh.
big sales, and Sony had huge sales of the soundtrack, the music, all around the world. So
Yeah,
there are they hit a good one with that one.
definitely. Do you have all the like going back to the collector part? Do you have all the physical like the media versions of that as well?
I do. I have the cassette, I have the mini disc, I have the CD, which has three different covers. I have the
Ah,
vinyls, which are two different vinyl covers. And in addition, I have the laser disc as well for from Italy and the US.
nice. Actually, that's a great segue because when you talk about international stuff, one of the things I've seen with you as a collector, and you identify as the spawn hunter online. You tend to, I'm not sure if it's for work or pleasure, but you tend to travel a lot. It seems, and you're out there actually meeting other spawn collectors from other regions, and I've seen in particular Peru and France. I saw photos on your page where you're actually taking photos with other collectors that you're taking time to meet up with in other countries. Tell me about those experiences.
Oh, that's great that you bring that up, JD. I do enjoy. So my day job is to travel. I am a cybersecurity engineer, so I'm traveling to different power plants around the 50s of the United States. So, in fact,
Nice.
I'm traveling tomorrow to, where am I going? Illinois. So yes, I'm constantly traveling all the time, and I do also overseas travel for work and also for personal reasons. But yes, the best part is to connect with other fans out there, whether it's in the United States or overseas. That is the best. The trip to France was definitely so awesome in many ways, because I got to meet two collectors, one of them being Petrospawn. You've probably
Hmm.
seen him on Instagram as well.
Hmm.
And he has an amazing collection. And for him to make time and meet me, and took me to have some fantastic chocolates from in Paris, and talk about Spawn, and him bringing gifts to me, right? Like, which was completely a surprise to me, and says, "Here, this is for you," and I'm just floored by the friendship. I think collecting, whether you're collecting Spawn or Batman or anything that you are into, but that connection with other people, with other collectors, and those friendships that you build and create, that has been the icing on the cake for me as a collector, to be able to go to countries like that and say, hey, if you want to meet, come over. And I was in Peru, and I said, yeah, wait, are you the Spawn hunter? I'm like, yeah, yeah, I'm here in Peru. It's like, no way. It was like, yeah, come meet. And they met me, and by doing so, I met the publishers of Spawn in Peru, who have the
Oh,
license to publish Spawn in Peru, and they gifted me with the already out of print Spawn collection in Spanish from Peru. That's out of print, completely hard to find, and they said, this is for you. And I'm like, wow. I didn't even think about looking for it, because I know it's so hard to find, and for them to say, this is for you, the complete collection, I was floored. And again, it's the friendships, and I give them in return. I bring Spawn Hunter T-shirts, or Spawn Hunter stickers, or hats,
yeah.
as I'm wearing one, and those relationships just built layer upon layer, and we're still friends. We help each other. If somebody in France needs a figure that's only released in America, done deal. I'll get it for you, and that's how I like to help, and they help me too.
That's awesome. And you're right. It is definitely those connections that we can make in the collecting community that can really, I mean, the collecting itself can be a joy, and can be its own therapy, as has been spoken about and on a recent episode as well. But having that sense of community with the thing you love as well can just bring a whole new level of enjoyment to collecting as well. And it's amazing that you get to connect with those people, and you get the chance to go out there and see their collections, and get awesome items like that as well. Obviously, people can probably hear you've got a bit of an accent. So, are you? What's your origin as well? So, do you have?
Sure. I was born in Peru, South America,
Okay, yeah.
Lima, and I
So
moved
that
to the
has
United
a,
States.
a more direct lineage to you when you get that copy of the comic as well, right?
Oh yes, oh absolutely. And I love to bring back gifts when I go to Peru. I still have a property in Peru that I go to as much as I can. It's right on the beach. And by the way, everybody's invited to go, so please.
Oh, nice.
And I go there. I moved to the United States when I was 13, and I've made my career, and my family and everything else here in the United States. But I do often go back to Peru. I love going back to Peru as much as I can. I like to go out there and visit friends, and not necessarily with the collecting mind, but just to be out there and kind of just enjoy the beach, and just kind of enjoy life a little bit more, because life moves pretty fast.
That's true. That's true. And your collection in Colorado, are you in a basement area that I can see you in now with all the shelving? It's massive, absolutely massive. Quick question. Do you have an idea of the number that you're up to in total of items at the moment?
Yes. So the last time I counted was, I think, late last year, and it was over 3,000 items. And then when I say items, it could be like the CDs, could be the soundtrack, it could be an action figure, but it was over 3,000 items, and it's nonstop, ever growing, because every day there's a new item coming in. There's a new item and it's not just about. And yes, as you can see, probably one of the things that most people tell me is that it's very well organized,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that
Yes.
I really thrive to, is that I don't like to have that hoarder look, or boxes that are just still even not unopened on the side or in the corner. I like to, if I purchase something or if I'm collecting something, I like it to be something that means something in the larger scale of the collection. So not just because, oh, I gotta have this and that, but something that it could be just one item, and that one item to me would mean a lot to just have that one item than just having 10 of another item, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That totally makes sense. And it looks like you take very good care of those items as well. I'm seeing a lot of toys that look like they're in protective cases as well. And I know that you also have your comics, a lot of the comics that are graded and in slabs. And I say slabs as a term that people might not be familiar with. Someone actually messaged me following the comic collector that I had on when I was talking about slabs, and they said, maybe you explain what slab is to someone because they had to look it up. But a
For
slab
sure.
obviously is a plastic protective case that's used when grading comics. And so when you have your sevens or your 9.9s and tens, which is very very rare, obviously you've got a lot of 9.8s I see in your collection. What sort of care and do you do in casing everything as well? Like, because that's a whole new effort, like a whole different level of effort in collecting as well.
Absolutely. One of the things that with the Spawn Hunter collection that I strive to have is that not just the item that comes into the collection, but the condition of the given item.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a carded figure, it has to be in really good condition. The Spawn action figures, as we talked about, the size and scale of the action figure, it's bigger than your Star Wars size. So the
Mm-hmm.
packaging to put given size, it's also bulky, and it's in larger scale. So they tend to get damaged easier because of that size. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, to find the item in good condition, in mint condition, as some collectors call it, it's a challenge, especially being that some of these figures were released in the 90s. As a collector today, a Spawn collector today in 2023, you can understand the fact that there's variance. Uh, for all your listeners out there, as you can see, McFarlane makes tons of variants with the DC multiverse, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
not just one
Yes.
Batman. There's going to
Uh-huh.
be unmasked Batman. There's going to be a battle damage Batman, and there's going to be
Uh-huh.
a Walmart exclusive Batman. So that is not new. Let me tell you guys that that's been done since the 90s. Todd McFarlane is the king of variants. So back in 1992, when Spawn came out, there are potentially about 15 different versions of the Spawn 1 figure. And
Mm.
back then, we didn't have Google, we didn't have message boards, we didn't have Facebook. So you bought what you found. There was no way for you to find out if a guy in Japan, oh, well, my Spawn figure is blue. And I'm like, well, mine's black. Wait, what? So you come to learn these things way later in the game, and you're trying to catch up and complete that collection. So DC Multiverse guys, you guys are very lucky, because at least you can be on top of what's coming out, when it's coming out, and how many variants are out there. But it was hard for us back then in the 90s to catch every single variant of the figures.
Yeah. Is there a variant that has eluded you that's like a grail item that you're still seeking out to this day?
Well, that's a great question. There is one Spawn Series 1 figure that was released in Brazil, and it
Mm.
was done by a company in Brazil, but following Todd McFarlane's standards of the figure. I do have that figure. It's coming. I just got it, so I'm fingers crossed that it arrives in good condition, and it would be the last figure I need for the Series 1 Spawn figures.
Oh, nice. And that's on its way.
It's on its way. And right before that was the Spanish carded Spawn Series 1 figure that had eluded me for a while. And being that obviously I speak Spanish as well, I had to have it in my collection. So getting that figure, I felt that it was complete, but no. Lo and behold, there is a Brazilian Spawn figure, and now we'll be satisfied with it.
And also made mention of, speaking to a Japanese collector, and I've noticed on a couple of posts on your page that you do have quite a number of Japanese items within your collection as well. Is that Do you have a specific hookup to someone over there that you like, when obviously all the traveling and all the communicating you've done with other collectors? Do you have someone there that gets you these items?
Well, this is going to be something that I give credit to Petrospawn. We talked about Petrospawn. He's another big time Spawn collector, and
Yeah.
he has a large number of Japanese items, and he has been my go-to person for all of these Japanese exclusives, as you may call them. With that said, to add another to piggyback on that answer, it's my favorite collectibles are the collectibles from Japan. I
Mm.
love the Japanese writing, not to mention I love the culture and everything. But every item from Japan Spawn related, it's a win for me. Just the comics. They had items that were not released in the United States, like cigarette lighters and matchbooks and puzzles and all of these amazing items that were never released in the United States. So you can imagine the hunt of going after those Japanese items is just, I want to say it's fun. I don't know if some people might say it's stressful. I think it's fun because you get to connect with people from other countries. You get to make those connections. And I have made connections, besides Petrospawn, I have made connections with other collectors that have the lighters, and we find a way to send the lighters over to through customs so they don't get stuck because they're lighter fluid. So you can imagine like the hurdles that you have to jump through just to get
Mm.
a lighter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's in your name, right? You are the spawn hunter. So this is what you do. You track down these items.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. That's how you do it. That's how you have to do it.
Well, you obviously probably don't know this because you haven't listened to the podcast before, but people would have heard me talking about the fact that I'm actually going to Japan later this year. So I'm already going to be keeping an eye out for pins while I'm at the Disney parks for a previous collector. I have a collector at the very start of this season who loves Winnie the Pooh and Toy Story, and I'm going to be keeping eye out for Disney items for her. Uh, but for you, I guess I can always keep an eye out if I come across something
Oh,
Spawn while I'm in
that would be
Japan, because
that would be
I do
grand. Thank you.
I do hope to get into a couple of stores and toy stores and things, and maybe even a couple of thrift stores, depending on how I'm traveling for time there. But I can always keep an eye out if I see something for Spawn, I'll send a message through and let you know.
Well, thank you, JD. And let me tell you, I'm jealous because it's one of the countries that I have yet to visit. It's Japan, and please, anything that will have Spawn with something Japanese on it, it could be toilet paper. I don't care. I will gladly accept it. Seriously, no, that's very kind of you, and I'm very jealous. But I think you're gonna be geeking out in Japan because I think Japan is like the ultimate geek out for anybody that's
Mhm.
a collector.
This will be my second time there, and
Oh my
I
gosh.
definitely loved it when I went there originally. So just actually quickly, just to follow up on the Japanese stuff, those items that you're talking about, are they all McFarlane official license items, or do they tend to have a few unofficial items over there as well?
That's a great question, JD. For the majority of the items, they were licensed. They were licensed McFarlane Productions items. Yes,
Yeah.
but there's also a small percentage that were not. Like anything in Asia, like anything over in other countries, you come to find out what we call it, like these knockoffs, right? The
Mm-hmm.
knockoffs, and there is a niche for these collectibles as well. I could
Yeah.
say that I have a couple of items that were released in Asia, not necessarily just Japan, but you have Hong Kong and Singapore, Taiwan, that were unlicensed items, but they are Spawn items, right? So you tend to also kind of look for those items too, and I have been. I have been purchasing them, but the large majority of the Japanese exclusives are definitely official released items. And I know, if you can see that this is a puzzle.
Mm.
This is a Spawn official Spawn puzzle that
Does
was
it
just
say?
released in Japan.
What does it say at the top of that?
Tiffany,
I thought that
Tiffany,
was said Tiffany
yeah.
at the top
There's
of it. Yeah.
Tiffany. There's Spawn. There's different types and different sizes as well. So, but all of these are licensed Todd McFarlane Productions official puzzles, but they never made it to the United States, and it's such a shame because who wouldn't love to have Spawn puzzles, 108 pieces, stuff like that. It's licensed and it's nice. And then there's the unlicensed stuff that are action figures or keychain size
Yeah.
plastic collectibles with Spawn on it too, and obviously the knockoffs, the blunt knockoffs as well. But you will find knockoffs anywhere in the world that were made for Spawn.
Well, I mean, as a Batman collector, I see things like that all the time, especially when it comes to key rings and like smaller collectibles like that. Anything they can whack a Batman logo on or make look like a Batman. I've come
Absolutely.
across hundreds of those in my time, I would probably say. Speaking of more official items, though, I see something in the background sitting on the shelf behind your head that is on my list of things to discuss. Is that the 20th anniversary resin statue?
The 20th anniversary resin statue. It's not that one. That
It's
one
not
is
that
an
one?
actual That's an actual third party Spawn figure.
Ah,
Yes, and it's not a 1/6 scale. It's almost like a quarter scale
it's
Spawn figure.
huge.
It's
I can see
massive.
it.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
huge. But the 20th anniversary figure, oh, the statue, it's on a shelf. I have two of those. I have the artist proof and I have the
Yeah.
official release.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful statue. I have all of the statues, and some of them I have one, two, three. For example, like the 20th anniversary statue, I have four of them because there was an artist proof, there were two prototypes, the actual signed release and the unsigned released. So another thing, right? Who would think that there would be four or five different statue variations of the same statue? It will drive you bonkers.
How did you track down? Because that's the thing I was going to ask you about is the artist proof. How did you track that down?
Oh, well, yeah, that's definitely a story in itself. But I have to say that I mean, oof, that is a good question. It's a good story, and all the items that you see have a story behind them, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
I love about collecting too. Not just the friendships, it's the stories behind them. But
Mm-hmm.
I have a good friend of mine that went to a toy show in New Jersey, and then he took a picture of the Spawn table people were selling, and they were prototypes. So then he sends me the picture and he says, "Hey, are you interested in these Spawn action figure prototypes?" And I go, "Wow, I mean, they're definitely not in my budget, but that's really cool."
Mm-hmm.
So I posted that picture on Facebook and I said, "Wow, check out these prototypes. They're not mine, but just to share them with everybody." And Petrospawn, Guillaume, he saw the picture, and months later, he reaches out to me and says, "Where did you take that picture of those prototypes?" And I said, "Oh, that was a friend of mine that was at a toy show many months ago, and he took a picture. Do you think you could track down the seller of those prototypes?" And I'm like, "Wow, I mean, like, we're talking like Scooby-Doo stuff here now, because we're not only just months after, but now who the heck knows who the seller was?" And you know what? That inspired me to be the Spawn Hunter, because I started to track down all of the connecting dots to get back to that seller. And it was through, probably you heard of a company called the Force Horsemen. They make sculpts and they make their own action figures line. And
Yep.
one of those guys, his name is Eric Hasey. He's one of the Force Horsemen. I have him as a friend on Facebook. And man, I went down the rabbit hole on connecting the dots and finding, till I finally found a former employee of McFarlane Toys who lived in New Jersey and who had sold prototypes before. And I found him. I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I'm doing this because a friend is interested. We're interested, and let's see what happens." And he responded and said, "That's me. Yes, and
Nice.
let's talk." And the rest is history. And I've come to build this friendship with this guy. His name is Steve Hamadi. He's a former employee of McFarlane Toys. Again, he went beyond the collecting. It went beyond the buying and acquiring pieces. It went.
Hmm.
I've been to his house, I think 5 times. Every time I fly to New Jersey, I visit him. We have pizza, we have beer, we talk toys, we talk Spawn, and then he'll be like, "Hey, Ty, I found this. I don't know if you're interested." And I'm like, "Yes, Steve, I am."
Of
And
course you are.
and
Of
in,
course you are.
and in that, and in that process, here's the beautiful thing, JD, is that I'm not collecting the prototypes, right? I could. I mean, they're in front of me. They're being offered to me, but
Yeah.
I feel like, you know what? Petrospawn is the guy who always collects the prototypes, and
Ah,
and I feel like this has got to go to his collection, and I feel happy that I can do that because I don't want to be that guy. No, I just got to have it. No, 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 it's mine. It's mine. I saw it first. No, I don't go by those rules. And to me, it's like most people say like, but that's a cool prototype. And I'm like, yeah, but I feel like Petrospawn likes these. He collects them, and he helps me with other stuff. So I feel like there's that friendship. I don't know. It goes beyond that 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 eager hoarder type collector, and more of a,
yeah.
I want to help my friends out there too. And that's,
Altruistic. Yeah.
it's karma. It's karma. I tell you, JD, it's karma because what goes around comes around. It really does.
Nice. Yeah, and like you said, you've built that community of collectors and people to help you out. He's obviously helped you with getting the Japanese items, which you love as well. So you
He
get
does.
things that he loves, he gets the things that you love, and it's great that you got that back and forth with him. That's absolutely amazing, and you have quite an amazing collection that it's right. You probably don't need to have, like, you could go out and try and get every different item and every different variation, but you're obviously very happy with the collection you've got already. In terms of Todd McFarlane, though, have you ever had a chance to meet him? I don't know, did he get out to the conventions much?
Absolutely. Living in New Jersey, I was exposed to a lot of the comic book shows out in New York City. So
Yeah.
shows like the Big Apple Con, shows like the New York Comic Con, and Todd McFarlane, through his marketing career, because he's a great salesman and
Yes.
businessman, he's done a lot of shows out in New York City for his toy line. And he's gone out there many, many times, and I've had a chance to meet him many, many times. The times that I've met Todd McFarlane have been as a fan, 100% as a fan, right? And it was never, I was not the Spawn hunter back then. I was just another Spawn collector, another Spawn fan. And in every time that I've met Todd McFarlane, he's always been awesome with us, awesome with the fans. Takes the time to talk to you, to answer your questions,
Nice.
and sign your items. And I'm looking forward to now meeting Todd McFarlane as the Spawn hunter, and just have a different approach to him, because one of the things that a lot of people should understand about Todd McFarlane and the Spawn character is that what we talked about earlier in the interview is that
Hmm.
it's basically an unknown character when you compare it to mainstream characters.
Yeah,
So
100%.
so the drive behind the creator, Todd McFarlane, to take a character that is his own creation and grow that character and be driven to make this character flourish, to
Hmm.
make this character grow, to make this character be a house brand name for everybody, right? To this point that kids today can buy a Mortal Kombat video game and play as Spawn as a playable character. So
Nice.
to take something that he created when he was younger and to come to fruition and to be mainstream, to have Jamie Foxx as a potential actor to play in the movie, to have to to be a major producer and a major player in the game. It's that that alone to me is something that is inspiring because it makes you fight for your dreams and never give up. And when people tell you no, you can't, oh no, who knows, we don't know Spawn, we don't know what Spawn is, And he
Yeah.
didn't give up. He stuck to his guns. And now look at Image Comics, the way that they are and the things that they have promoted. So there is the Spawn, the character, the Spawn, the collection, the Spawns, the collectors and the fans, and then there's Todd McFarlane and the drive that he had to make this character be where he is today.
I love that. I love that. Ty, I think that's probably a great way to wrap up this our interview and this time, because this whole bringing Spawn to another audience, hopefully people listening to the podcast might be inspired to go out and check out this character as well. Check out the art, because a lot of people probably know the McFarlane toy line, but specifically probably not where that toy line really got its origins from as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, JD. That's definitely something to admire, to definitely admire, and to have a Toyland that's competing against Mattel, that's competing against Hasbro. I mean, like, and people that are going bunkers over buying every single figure. That all of that is Todd McFarlane and McFarlane Toys and McFarlane Productions. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, as I said, I'm going to wrap it up. But before I let you go, I always get people to plug their socials so people know where to go and find you and your collection. So tell people.
Sure. I'm Spawn Hunter on Instagram. So definitely you can hit me up there anytime. I'd love to answer questions and connect with other collectors all over the world. And I'm also on Twitter at Pogoman, aka Spawn Hunter, and on YouTube, Spawn Hunter channel.
Nice. And I think you were talking about potentially bringing out a podcast later in the year. Is that still in the works?
That's still in the works. That's still, once when I'm not traveling, I want to sit down in this room and do that, and do the podcast. And I have some cool ideas for the podcast as well. So I'm fingers crossed that I don't have to travel in a bit in the summer, so I'll be able to sit down here and do that for you too.
All right. Well, I'll put all those links in the description for people, and then when the podcast does actually go live, make sure you share that with me, and I'll include that and update the description so that anyone who wants to go and check it out can. So, Ty, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, and yeah, I wish you the best of luck with your travels and hunts.
Thank you, JD. I appreciate it. Thank you for making the time for me.
If you liked the episode, please consider following or subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also join me on Instagram at Collecting Heroes, where you can see photos of the collections of the people that I'm talking to, as well as some of my own.